even in the 20 years that I've been doing this in journalism, the equipment has changed, the formats have changed, the platforms have changed, like the tools that we use have all drastically changed. But the constant is just really great storytelling.
All right, what's up, y'all? Today we have Matt Ford on the show. Matt has an extensive media background. He's done lighting for Hollywood movies like Spider-Man 2. We worked together at the Associated Press, where he was based in Egypt. He's gone on to be a founder and CEO of a media company called Vignette Interactive. And now he has his own media outlet in Barcelona under his own name, Matt Ford Media. So, Matt, welcome to Beyond the News.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Cool, man. So before we started, we were talking a bit about your path into journalism and how COVID is now going to be changing the way we do these productions and get crews on the ground. And maybe you can talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so I mean, first on my background, I started in film, as you mentioned. I was a lighting technician, which basically meant I was working on these like 1,000-person crews.
Wow.
Those kind of productions are obviously at a standstill right now and probably won't start up for a while. I transitioned into journalism shortly after 9/11. I was, starting to get a lot of interest in world events at that time, because I think a lot of people probably woke up realizing that there's a lot of things going on in the world that they thought they knew about, but maybe didn't. And for me personally, that led me to going back to studying journalism at a really interesting time in journalism. I think a lot of people don't remember this era. There was no YouTube yet. Streaming video wasn't a thing. Production in journalism was basically just for TV at the time. But this was, we could see that right around the corner that video online was going to be a big thing. And so that's where I was sort of focusing my energy. What does, in an interactive digital environment, what does video and visual storytelling look like? And that became sort of the main focus of my work at Penn State, and then doing a master's at Northwestern. And as part of that, I went and interned in Cairo, and that is where I fell in love with the Middle East. And I had wanted to work there, but they offered me a job to work on the Obama-McCain election, and that seemed like too good a deal to pass up. So I spent 4 years working in DC on a multimedia team there, and that eventually transitioned to where we met, which is when you were in Bangkok and I was in Cairo working at our respective regional bureaus. And I think that's where there was a misunderstanding, I think, when I got into journalism, that there was going to be like this one-man band, backpack-style journalism. And I think I quickly realized that that was never going to be the future. It basically means you're doing a lot of things fairly mediocre. But really team-focused productions, makes a lot more sense and is a better way to ensure a stronger level of quality. And so when I left the AP, I wanted to build a company that could still, at a decent price point, offer high-level media production from, some of the most difficult places in the world, where getting a lot of these stories out is almost impossible. And so we had a pretty good operation, lasted about seven or 8 years. And basically every project that we did was a coordination of, our core team, and then also a combination of people that were actually from the countries that we're reporting on. And that was a big priority for us, is making sure that, wherever we could staff up locally and wherever those skills existed, that we brought those people on. So whether that was just translators or fixers, but also if there were field producers or photographers or people with production experience or the right equipment, we would also, do that way, cinematographers, etc. That whole world that business existed in does not exist currently. And I think this is what's interesting about this moment, is that that scenario might not return for a very long time. I mean, basically, all of our productions were dependent on, eventually, once all the groundwork had been laid on with the local team and the core team, is bringing in a lot of expensive equipment, doing these crazy production sprints for as little as 3 days to as much as like 2 weeks, where you're interacting with hundreds of people over the course of a few days. And yeah, I just don't think that's going to be possible anytime soon. So it's got me a lot thinking about what does that mean, not just for our own careers and the way that we do our work, but also what does that mean for the industry, how the stories get out, the people that consume the news. Are we going to start seeing larger gaps in coverage? Are we going to be missing more stories? Is it going to be hard to understand what's going on the ground because of that? And then also, it doesn't just affect, the media industry isn't the only one that works like this. The humanitarian aid industry also works this way, where there's a lot of combination of local staff and international staff. And you're seeing lots of problems with them being able to operate at their maximum effectiveness. So all of that has ripple effects throughout the global economy, throughout like these massive humanitarian sectors. So yeah, it's a big question, and I think that's where a lot of my focus has been right now, is thinking about, okay, what do the next few years look like, and how can we do better in this new normal?
And what does that look like now then? I mean, because everything's changing, like you say, all the borders. It's hard for us to travel, right? Borders are locked down, and I mean, maybe you can even talk about that, because I know you've covered a lot of probably border crises throughout the years. So, especially being in the Middle East and Istanbul.
So there's the potential for some good things to come out of it. I mean, I think the first thing you think of is like, okay, all these like foreigners, like white guys like me won't be, flying into countries that they're not from and working there, and that'll shift the impetus or the need onto local media practitioners to be able to fill that void, which is great. That's exactly what should happen, but it's wrong to assume that that's going to happen overnight. There's some fundamental issues that there's a lack of equipment in most places. There's a lack of funds to be able to fund a production operation. So even if you got dropped $100,000 worth of high level production equipment, is there going to be a local economy that's going to be able to sustain that? Is there going to be the training in place so that the local media practitioners in places like Niger, South Sudan, stuff like that, are going to be able to coordinate effectively with like the BBC or high-level media broadcasters. So there's a lot of questions about how do you transition to a place where, yes, we'll still be coordinating digitally in this global world, but how do we make sure that the resources, the training, and listening to what is needed to actually effectively execute in these places where we just can't go to anymore. And I think that's going to be a big question. And how quickly we can scale those kind of things up, I think it's still a question mark. I don't have a great answer for it. And a lot of it's going to depend on the nature of how this evolves over the next few months.
And beyond just the coverage of media, I mean, what do you see, and what is your fears about some of these areas of vulnerable communities now that this virus is starting to spread across the world, based on places that you've been to and places you've seen? I'm sure you've seen refugee camps that if this starts to spread there.
Yeah. So a lot of my time at Vignette, I was doing work with organizations that work a lot with refugees and displaced people. So International Rescue Committee, Unicef, Search for Common Ground, which is a peace building organization. And so a lot of the time I was shooting, we were working in refugee camps or working in places where highly vulnerable communities, which basically means that they're at the edge. Like, they don't get food, they're probably going to starve to death. If they're at risk of violence, they're at risk of being taken advantage of by authorities in some place, but also other communities of need. So they're just people that are basically at the brink. And so what we're seeing, and right now in the world, like those numbers, even before COVID, those vulnerable populations have never been larger. There's been almost more refugees in the past few years than we've ever seen before, or more refugees and displaced persons. And so that's a large amount of people who are very at risk for something like COVID, especially when they're packed into small areas with a lot of potential spread. And then where a lot of this is managed by money that comes from international, or basically from the West, US, Europe, China, other major donor countries that, frankly, right now are more focused on, getting their own COVID response under control. So these other countries that tend to rely on or tend to need help from these donor countries, they're still getting some of it, but it's going to be rocky, and
Right.
that's going to be counted in lives. People will die because of that. It'll
And when you
spread
say
faster and
that's going to be rocky, is that because there's not going to be as much donations coming in because everybody's going to be a bit constrained at the moment, or is it
it's probably
getting
going to
in
be
there?
a
Or
combination of everything. I mean, we're entering into a global depression, and so right now we're basically thinking of like, what does that do for my job, and what does that do for the economy of my country? But like, also that has ripple effects into the global aid system, the effectiveness of international bodies like the UN. And so, yes, if all the countries in the world are seeing like a significant drop in their GDP, are taking on significant debt to try and keep their own country under control, then yeah, some of the first places to get cut are contributions to humanitarian crises. And so that might mean that a lot of these vulnerable communities around the world are, going to be in a very difficult spot. And we might see further migration for economic forces. I mean, it's going to be one ripple effect after another. And I don't know if we as a world have turned towards, looking at what those ripple effects might mean. So, like, we're still just trying to figure out how to get it under control in our own country.
right,
Here, I'm mostly focused on being able to spend an hour outside a day for the first time in 8 weeks. So,
for sure, for sure.
you know, so that's one of those things that, like, but it's still there. Like, just because we are like inwardly focused on the craziness of this situation, all of those global problems that influence all of us are not going to go away.
Yeah, so you mentioned being like able to go out now for first time in about 8 weeks. So what's been like in Barcelona? I mean, you guys have been hit pretty hard by this virus compared to other places.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
One of
fairly
the worst hits, actually, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was a little slow to respond in Spain, like most places. There was, I think, a question mark of like, how bad is this really?
Yeah.
And then once they realized how bad it was going to be, I'm very new to Spain. I just moved here at the end of last year from Istanbul, and I'm very impressed with the response. It's been very conservative, but I think that conservative response, of which most of the government has gotten behind, has started to pay off. I mean, there's significant decreases all across the country. They're starting to be able to open things up, and I think there's a little bit of hope that it won't be the normal as before, but it'll be a new kind of normal in which like some level of socialization will return. The problem is the biggest question mark, and the one that most countries who are even doing well in the response, is that international travel is going to continue to be the strongest vulnerability, even once they
Sure.
get things under control in their own country. So the chance of us being able to like return to see our family in the U.S. is probably a long ways off.
Yeah.
And even if we did that, it would be 2 weeks of quarantine in the U.S. probably, and then 2 weeks of quarantine when we got back here. So basically, I have to commit more than a month
It's
to
crazy.
do one trip. Yeah,
It's
and my
crazy.
wife's pregnant, so
Yeah.
like we're in the middle of our second trimester right now, and I don't want to go on a trip at the moment that could potentially put her and our
Totally.
unborn child at risk. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a difficult calculus, and yeah, it's sort of a rethink on how you do everything. So
Okay, so you mentioned you just moved to Barcelona. So what is that like? You're in the middle of a global pandemic, which you obviously didn't expect. You're moving not even across the city or across the country, you moved to a new country and starting a new company, and this has happened. So what do you like? How are you preparing for that? And right now, you know what I mean? Yeah, I think
yeah, I
it's
mean,
a great idea of how to look at small business, creating a startup, essentially a startup media company in this time. I mean, it's a really valuable lesson for many to have, I think.
yeah, I mean, yeah. So we got very lucky. I mean, the moving here from Istanbul and getting the visa and everything else was like a 6 to 9 month process, and I can't imagine going through any of that had COVID come sooner. Um, but we did get set up here. We moved in on like New Year's Eve, and had
Right
most of
before.
January to like get. Yeah, and we got our apartment checked out in January, and then yeah, and then things were starting to look pretty bad come late February. So yeah, we literally got here just under the gun and have been set up pretty well to sort of wait this out. But yeah, it has definitely changed how I'm thinking about everything about you know the work that I do. Now, the shift in what I did before Vignette, we had a larger team and we were running multiple projects at once, like a much larger scale organization. And now we shut that down towards the end of the year as part of the transition. And now I'm mostly focusing on like independent projects, which I will still probably like build up teams for almost certainly. But basically it's like everything's in pre-production indefinitely is basically where I'm at right now. So trying to develop projects and ideas and think about what might be the most important thing to do once the new normal comes, which is probably why I'm thinking so much about what this might look like once things do begin to open up. But yeah, I mean, in a time like this, the revenue is definitely going to be down. So it's basically about keeping your costs really low. And so that's basically what I've done, like scale back every part of my operations. And yeah, just trying to make savings and the modicum of revenue that comes in from consulting and other remote work to sort of get through this moment. I mean, I think it's hard to plan too much right now.
Yeah.
Because we just don't know. I mean, the normal changes every week. So from a business point of view, I wouldn't get too hung up in being like, all right, I'm going to design a business plan about life this week. So it's really, you got to think about, okay, what's the business that I want to have and I want to run a year from now, assuming there's still going to be a lot of what's happening now, still around a year from now. And then 3 years from now, 5 years from now, and eventually 10 years from now, and what's going to be sustainable and resilient when these kind of things happen, and think about, because there's possibility that like we might have a very open society again, and then bam, it flares back up, or it mutates and the vaccines that were developed don't work, or a next level pandemic comes and we haven't made the changes to be as prepared as we are now. I mean, these had other pandemics in the past, like Ebola and SARS and other ones that have devastated other parts of the world. I think this is a wake-up call for a lot of people. This is the first time we're seeing it in places like Europe and the US. But this doesn't mean COVID's going to be the last one or only a once-in-a-century kind of incident. These things do happen to us as humans. So it's a good time to design your business in a way that's going to be resilient for these kind of changes. How can we have remote backup plans and that kind of stuff? I remember a meeting I did in Lebanon with the business person there. And, Lebanon has the unfortunate history of having conflicts and violent flare-ups that come there. And so every business person in Beirut is thinking about, okay, what happens if conflict returns? And then basically it's like everybody on my staff has a laptop and can, fly to another country and work from there if they need to. And so that kind of, flying's probably harder for them right now, but having that sort of mindset where like if everything goes south, there's still a way that this can function. I've still got, revenue streams that aren't dependent on like large productions and lots of people moving around. My last business was very much like that. I spent 3 weeks out of the month every month either flying around for a production or for client meetings and building out teams and that kind of stuff. So I'd wanted with this like new machination of the work that I'm doing to travel less because I have a kid on the way and wanted to have a little more time to be around family.
For sure.
So this is sort of forced to the extreme to like rethink how I'm designing my.
I'm sure the best will work out once this is all said and done, though. Keeping the optimistic view.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, or?
But yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, what about the what you said right now? I think people are just starting to get used to the idea that this is not going to go away next week. That this is going to be around, like you say, for a year. It might not be, but I think people are starting to get used to the idea that this is not finishing before year's end. But
some things will get better, like the ability to eat in restaurants. Like there are changes you can do so that like those things could come back. There'll be a way to drink at bars where there's the risk is minimized. But international travel that's the one where like for us who depend so much on that, like that's probably not coming soon because most of the countries that we live in were already sort of shying away from global engagement, and the politics of it was not great. Wanting to invest less in foreign countries, and sort of an anti-immigrant, anti-refugee sentiment popping up across several countries in the world. And so the fear that I have now is that a lot of leaders around the world will use this moment to demonize those groups and then shut borders. And that sort of lack of communication and back and forth between countries is probably going to be problematic, not just for our work, but also for how we, interact and cooperate on global challenges, so like pandemics.
For sure, definitely. I mean, Thailand relies heavily on tourism. So I mean, right now it's empty. I mean, I went for a walk in the park yesterday, and we saw the Marriott building. It's totally empty, and just a few rooms, like they created a smiley face out of the empty hotel rooms, and it's just like everything else is dark. It's empty.
Yeah.
So it's just, I mean, there's going to be a lot of, like I said, that's not going to be returned soon. But at the same time, restaurants are starting to open, and you have like full face mask, plastic shield mask when you go to eat now. It's quite bizarre and a little dystopian, I think. But
yeah, I'm looking forward to the fashion world to get in on this, because I think there's going to be like fashionable like respirator shield masks for like high-end restaurants and stewardesses and stuff. So because right now everything looks really intimidating when you're being served by people who are wearing all this stuff. But a friendlier, more fashionable version of PPE will probably pop
could
up.
be. We have a little bit of just the regular face mask with different designs on them, so I'm sure that will come.
Yeah, we've been making our exactly.
So what about the you mentioned before, you're traveling like 3 weeks out of the month, and 30 countries while you're at Vignette. I'm sure you have some crazier stories from there, or maybe you can share one or two that come to mind.
Sure. One of my favorite ones from most recently, or sort of like a life dream, was doing work with IRC and the Sesame Foundation. And basically what that meant was going with a bunch of Muppets and Muppeteers into a refugee camp and filming the kids interacting with the Muppets. So we had like Grover, but then a bunch of localized characters that were airing in Jordan. And so this was like near the Syrian border in Jordan. And it was just like seeing, I mean, it's always fun to watch kids watching the Muppets, right? Like
sure.
they really enjoy it. And I grew up on the Muppets, so it's like always just such a joyful thing to watch the Muppets. But watching and be able to film these kids just, light up with so much joy and playing with these Muppets, like the whole camp was just alive with joy that day. And it was very different than other times when I've gone to just get sort of like a situation report, or just sort of try to get an understanding of what's going on and the conflict in a specific moment. This was really just about bringing in some Muppets and bringing joy to a bunch of children, and seeing how that kind of stuff can really bring alive these kids that have faced so much trauma. And part of why we were filming it is because they launched a program where they were using Muppets to do a lot of education-based programming for kids in these camps, because a lot of these kids have been out of school for several years now, and there's a big risk of these refugee children being a lost generation if they don't even get the basic education to read and do basic arithmetic. And so it's a big program with Sesame and the IRC to address those issues. And I think it was like, I was able to get like a wedding wish to my brother from Grover, and like it was just like so much fun.
That's cool.
I don't think I've ever had that much fun with like kids and Muppets and filming,
That's
on
awesome.
one shoot. And
That's awesome.
everybody that worked with the Muppets were just incredible people, and so it was just like great people, great material, and just seeing the joy of these kids. Like those are the kind of moments where there's a lot of like difficult stuff when you're covering conflicts and humanitarian crises, but when you get to see like have a really joyful day like that, it's like, oh yeah, this is why I love doing this. Like,
for sure.
Those are really good day. So,
It's pretty amazing, the the life and the beauty of children, that even in such harsh circumstances, a lot of times they can be in a dream world sometimes and create their own happiness as a child.
yeah.
Hopefully, not always, but hope. But and then like some of the tougher conflict places, like when you were saying that, like what comes to mind?
Um, I mean, a lot of my early focus was on Iraq. I mean, I did some work in Afghanistan for the AP, but not a lot. But like
Yeah,
Iraq was obviously a big primary focus. I did a lot of military embeds when I was at the Associated Press and working at
yeah, that's right. I
DC.
remember that. Yeah,
Uh, and then once I was in the region, I don't think I really did any military embeds once I was based out of Cairo, but I was still doing a lot of stuff where I was like going and doing work out of camps and working at the Baghdad Bureau. I think I covered the elections there at one point. I think my favorite project though in Iraq was one that I did with Unicef. We sort of like we were talking about. I think I always bristle a little bit when I watch a lot of these fundraising videos, and it's just like doe-eyed children with their glistening eyes staring at the camera, and then just showing like news reports that just show the devastation and don't actually get the personal stories across. And so we have this project with UNICEF for the State of the World's Children's Report, which is like the big report that they do every year about like what's going on with kids all over the world. And ours was this, trying to figure out a concept to do in Iraq. And the idea I had was like, all right, let's figure out a way to just really show the human side of some displaced people. So we went to Erbil, and our idea was to take like one of the sort of larger tents where they convene and have like the parents and kids or brothers and sisters or different family members sit across from each other and ask each other questions from key cards, and just have them sort of open up,
cool.
and then figure out a
Very
way to
cool.
cut that all together. It ended up being a disaster because when we get to the tent, there was like all this construction that was going on. There was so much noise. We couldn't get good sound. The lighting was terrible in the tent. It was also like Erbil just gets really hot in the summer. And so a lot of some things that we should have predicted and some things we couldn't predict, just ended up making it an impossible situation. And then we ended up finding like a studio that had a whole green screen set up, and it wasn't an ideal green screen, but so you can see in the video there's a little bit of roughage around people's faces. But it ended up being great. It was exciting for all the family members and kids and everything. We brought them all into the studio, and like one by one, they had these intimate conversations. And it was funny, and it was sweet, and some people cried, and it was just like, it was such an emotional couple of days, like interviewing all these people and getting to know them, and just seeing them talk about like what they want for their lives. And that was also a really, I think, one of my favorite ones. I can send you a link to that
Yeah,
one.
yeah,
But
please
that's
do. Yeah.
yeah, because my big issue, when I first got into wanting to cover conflicts, of course, there's like I want to be in the danger. I want to see the guns going back and forth. I want to be under rocket fire. I want to I want the adrenaline rush of all that. Like you might not say that out loud, but like that's basically you want to feel like you're in the movies.
I want to go back to that after you tell the rest of this, because I want to talk a bit about like what drives that. But sorry, go on.
Yeah. So the to finish, the problem is that when you are there, you're not getting very good stories. I mean, you like a lot of times you're undercover. You're not shooting very well when you're undercover, and frankly, like guns firing and rockets firing and missiles firing, they all look pretty much the same. So after a while, like you're pretty much just there for the adrenaline if you're not finding really unique stories. And I've found over the years that the best stories when it comes to covering conflicts are far away from the line of contact. So it's really,
That's good.
you
I've,
want to
I've
go
heard that a few
back to,
times. That's nice.
yeah, you want to talk to people whose lives have really been torn apart by it, who are trying to figure out how to make it work, who've seen a lot. And like, if you can really tell those stories, that's when you get to understand how the conflict influences those communities and then in turn influences the world. And that's, I think, where the really meat of storytelling about conflict and humanitarian crisis comes from. The bang, 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 like that. If you're in this long enough, like that's not where your primary focus is. So, yeah, what did you want to ask
Yeah.
about that?
So the bang bang. I mean, what what drives the desire to want to see that? I mean, I know when I was first going onto this path of journalism, I thought I only wanted to go cover conflict, and I haven't covered much of it besides protests in Hong Kong and which is not in Thailand, which is not like heavy conflict, war zone conflict. And right now, I don't have that desire to go see war anymore. And I question even why I had that in my on my mind in my early 20s. Like, yeah, I want to go see this crazy stuff. So I've always been curious what drives that. Even like to try to understand my own psychology of what drives that motivation to see that.
I mean, I think it's part of it is a romanticism of war that is, existed in media and accounts of war, for as long as, you know, I mean, even like Hemingway, like you read most of his war-based stuff, like it's like, oh, I want to see it too. I want to like get a sense of all the things that he felt when he was covering war. But now we have movies and everything else, which like dramatize it even more. And I think that does settle in that if you are looking to be a journalist and you want to cover really important things, this idea of being in the middle of a war feels like that's about as big as it can get. So in the same way of like being in the middle of a presidential campaign, it's like what are big news things like war and elections and like you want to be in the middle of it and feel like you're like witnessing history and sharing that. The problem is, you can be in the middle of elections and witness history and stuff like that, probably for 40, 50, 60 years. There's a lot of people who do that. If you're only going into the bang bang, you're not going to have a very long shelf life it is grueling. Like PTSD is real, especially for journalists, because not only are you there documenting it, you're suffering from all that, intense adrenaline and stress, but then you're also looking at that same material afterwards, and that can be equally as devastating. We did some work this past year with the Committee to Protect Journalists on sort of like the influences of this kind of trauma on journalists, and it's real. And so, and I think, like I said before, you realize after a while that that's not conflict reporting isn't just about filming people shooting each other. It really is about the interplay between societies, and how is what is conflict really? How is it resolved? How do you build towards peace? And sort of who are the people that are actually moving that forward? And it's only as a last resort, and only is it ever really accomplished, with the tip of a spear. It's usually a lot of people doing really hard work to try and integrate communities, to try and build some reconciliation, and that the bang bang can last very very quickly and be very exciting, but the hard work of ending conflicts and building peace takes years and years and years and years and decades. And but I think that's where it gets interesting. It's like moving societies past conflict with each other and towards some kind of coexistence. There's really really rich stories there.
So when you did that story in Erbil in Iraq, I mean, what's it like when you even board the plane to go there, or when you get off the plane? I mean, some people wouldn't even think like, okay, I think they're going to go to like Mexico, Cozumel on vacation, but a lot of people don't think about getting off the plane in Iraq. So how was that? Are you going with a team? Do you know where you're going once you get off the plane?
So for that one, because it was with Unicef, there was already a communications person, Lindsay McKenzie, who is not with Unicef anymore. But there's a team of Unicef folks that had made arrangements for us to get picked up. We had to figure out our visa situation, which is something you have to do on every project. And after that, it is fairly normal. Like you bring in a bunch of equipment, you get it from baggage claim, you meet the people you've arranged for. If you're not working with an organization that has their own transportation means, then you're working with a local fixer or production company or whoever the local side of your team is, to figure out the most secure, safe way to move equipment around, and all of your team. I mean, safety is the first consideration on any of these trips, because a place like Iraq I've been to several times before, but there are many places where I am the least experienced person there. I'm mostly the person bringing in the expensive equipment. Like that's the role that I'm playing and sort of overseeing like the cinematographic element, but the helping like shape the story and everything else is mostly done by people with stronger experience on a particular production. Um, so yeah, then you usually go to a hotel or other kind of accommodations that you've had worked out. You collaborate with the team and plan your shoot, and then you know it's like coming from the film world. There's no time to be wasted on production. Like people would say, like you know, it's like $1,000 spent in pre-production can save $1 million in production or something like that. And so, once we actually get on the ground with all the equipment and the whole team in place and everything else, like we're just bam, 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 trying to get everything done.
It's time to go.
Hopefully,
Yeah.
yeah, and that doesn't mean we're rushing our subjects or anything. Like at that point, we've established relationships we've pre-interviewed most of the people that we're going to be filming with because we don't want to be in there and be like, hi, we're just using you for a few minutes. It wants to be with people that we've gotten to know, that we understand, and so that they have the expectation that like we're not going to have a lot of time, and we want to be respectful of their time. But we are going to be filming fairly nonstop. We'll have tea first. We'll chat and do the things that we need to do to show respect. But then once those things have been done, we are going to be at a pretty good paced production schedule. And then it's pretty much that until the day you leave. But yeah, I'm probably forgetting a lot of like logistical things that might be interesting about running a production. But the thing I would say to anybody who's doing this, you're not going to be doing it anytime soon, but when you do
Sure.
do it,
Yeah.
is really trust people who have experience working in a specific country, because there are a lot of security factors that are unique to specific cities, countries. And
So like,
everything else.
what are some of those for people who don't know? Like, what is it? What is it that you go through? I mean, is there like some? I mean, we call it at our work a risk assessment, but like, what are some of the dangers in these places, and what are the considerations you go through before landing, or before taking your caravan on a car ride?
Yeah, so risk assessment that's what we call it too, and that's exactly it, because the risks differ wildly from place to place. Some places have almost no like street crime, but have a lot of corruption, and there's a potential to run against that. Some places have a lot of theft, so in the way that you move your equipment, like you never open the trunk unless you absolutely need to. Like your equipment's never exposed unless it needs to be. Like if you are in a high theft environment, then like there's different considerations than if you're in a place that has different risks. So like, are the local authorities ones that you can really rely on and coordinate with, or are they like, does it pose different risks of are they going to notify people that might be risky to you, or what's the sort of profile that you need to carry? And really, you're not going to know any of that unless you're coordinating with somebody who lives there and has a lot of experience working in that environment, and they'll be able to identify all the major risks, and then you figure out a plan that's built around those risks. And if something is not possible because of that risk assessment, like that's just it. Like you really have to let the risk sort of guide the framework of what kind of shooting and production you'll be able to do.
So out of all the 30 plus countries, what was the most dodgy experience or dodgy risk assessment you went through? Yeah.
I mean, dodgy is a good question. I'm sure they all sort of blur together.
Sure.
I mean, I'd say
I'm sure they do. Yeah.
I mean, for personal threat, like being in Afghanistan at the Afghanistan-Pakistan border and being under rocket fire, but that I was mostly with the military. So as far as the risk assessment goes, it was sort of like standard fare of basically what you do when you're on a military embed.
So what is that? I mean, what's going through your mind when you're under rocket fire? Are you, kissing your last breath goodbye already, or what?
I mean, mostly it's just like, oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck, please just stop, please be over with, please be over with. Because like you're under the, like basically you crawl under the bed is like the rule that you're supposed to do. It's not really going to help you that much, but if debris falls from the ceiling or stuff like that, so you're in these little outposts and like the first rocket might hit, or they might identify the rocket as it's incoming, and then the siren goes off, and then yeah, you just get under the bed and hope it's all. There's no grabbing your camera and running and filming it. By the time you got your camera and got outside, like you'll either have missed it or you'll be dead. So you basically just get under the bed and hope that it ends without anybody getting hurt. Um, that's what it's like. I'm like, this is stupid. Like I'm basically just like risking my life with rocket attacks, and not I'm probably not even the best place for the story. We did some good stories there for a few days, but the times when we were getting shot at was the most interesting stuff far. So,
So now that you said you had your kid along the way, I mean, is that changing all your thought process into what you will do and where you will go, even if things were open up in terms of the virus? But does that have a
yeah, certainly. I mean, I'd already sort of decided that I didn't care to be on the front line in the way that I was in my younger days at the AP as much anymore. It wasn't the most interesting work to me. But yeah, now that I've got a kid, I mean, not only do I not want to go to risky places, I don't want to travel as much. So I want to scale back the number of productions that I'm doing at any given time. I want to be able to spend more time, raising my daughter. And so, what are ways that I can do work that allows me to have more time at home while still, doing work that I'm proud of. And I don't quite have the answer to that yet because, COVID sort of threw a curveball into it that I need to figure out. So, yeah, I don't have any answers on that front, but yeah, it's probably going to be a mix of consulting, more focus on storycraft and pre-production and post-production work. And I think that's probably something that we're all going to be looking at. Having a nice editing suite in your house, which fortunately I do, allows me to spend productions only that I ever did only lasted like a couple of weeks. If we're doing multiple locations, it might be as long as 4 to 5 weeks. But the post-production process is always way longer than the production process. So
sure?
If I can figure out a way to stay home and do more pre-production and post-production work, then that's
Cool. Yeah.
It's one way.
Sounds awesome. Yeah, exactly. Like you say, adapting to the times, right? That's the name of the game right now.
Yeah.
So, and I want to just also backtrack in terms of landing in these places like Iraq, or I think we talked about South Sudan. Am I making that up?
Yeah.
And then so just kind of explain to people what it's like when you get out. I mean, what does it look like out the window? It probably doesn't look like like a city from where we grew up, right?
Yeah. So the thing that amazed me about South Sudan when I first arrived there, and that was like 2006, was my first time there. It's so green. I mean, some of these places it's not developed. There's a lot of just wild vegetation, and it looks just so green and incredible. And it's like you think oh, I'm going to a hot zone, and then you get there and it's like, wow, this looks like paradise. And that kind of messes with your head and your first time showing up in some of these places. But yeah, there's the first time it's amazing. The first time you're at a place, you'll be a little anxious. You'll be like, all right, what's all this mean? But eventually, it just starts to feel like a new normal, and you sort of get acquainted to the security work you have to take. And most of the time, when things happen to people that do our work, it's because they get too comfortable, and that sort of it is possible if you're doing conflict work a lot to sort of stop thinking about the risk that you're actually taking and get a little bit complacent sometimes. And that's always been part of the concern to me. It's am I still, being very diligent and keeping the security and safety of everybody that I'm working with in mind? Because you don't want to let that slide. It's the part that starts to put you at risk.
Cool. Definitely, man. Definitely. I think it's I like the way you talk about it, not only your safety, but the safety of the team.
Yeah,
So,
and also the people you're documenting. I mean, like
for sure.
a lot of this stuff, like an interview can put people at risk because even the team that you're working with, you might be traveling to a remote destination, but you got to consider what what implications that's going to have for the community after you leave and
Even from
while
what
you're
they say.
there. Yeah, and
Yeah.
so just being mindful of like the reason we do this is because it has a positive social impact if we do it well. But there are risks to real people in the way that we do our work, and so being aware of that and taking that into consideration is also very important.
Cool. I want to go through like this kind of speed round I want to get for people who are just starting out. I've been getting like a lot of questions of, oh, how do you become a journalist? How do you work in the field, do production? So
Hmm.
there's like just two questions. So the first one is like for you, what is the best thing about this industry, this kind of work, filmmaking, being in the field? What is the best thing about it?
So two very different sides of it. Being in filmmaking, especially where you're covering different countries, like I'm constantly just having to get smart all the time on countries that I just am not nearly familiar enough about. And so, um, and I think that you learn a lot about yourself when you're learning about other people and societies that are different from yours and other cultures. And so to constantly be exposed to lots of different amazing people all over the world has just been, I think, quite the blessing. And I think it's changed me as a person much more doing this kind of work around the world than anything I've done prior to it. So that aspect of just like working in global filmmaking. On the storytelling side of it, I think storytelling to me is just one of the most challenging things. Like figuring out what a strong narrative is that's going to engage people, like figuring out the emotional hook that's really going to bring people in. It's very, very difficult work, and sometimes I want to procrastinate it and not do it and stay far away from it. But when it starts to click and you're like, oh yeah, this is a good story, this is really coming together. Like those are just great moments. And so my advice is that all of this is going to change. The world's constantly going to change. Like even in the 20 years that I've been doing this in journalism, the equipment has changed, the formats have changed, the platforms have changed, like the tools that we use have all drastically changed. Most of the time for better, but the constant is just really great storytelling. So somebody who's starting out, like work on your storytelling chops above and all things. So and not just in journalism storytelling, but read stuff on screenwriting, read stuff on how novels are structured, read how a good song is put together. Like anywhere where there's really strong storytelling, like look at it, pick it apart, understand why it was built that way, and that's going to help fuel the way that you craft stories throughout the entirety of your career, no matter how things change.
That's awesome, man. I love that. I'm actually, after you said that, I'm gonna look back at this song I was starting to learn yesterday. It's by Mavis Staples. And it's called "You're Not Alone." I suggest you check it out, man. It's really cool. It's like a good
Oh
acoustic
yeah,
guitar, R&B style, and the lyrics. I was looking at them yesterday. Are really amazing. So I'm picking it apart a little bit later on today.
yeah. Send me a link for it. Like so, I go back and forth. I'll like watch something just to enjoy it, and then I'll like put another hat on and just be like, all right. Like so,
Dude,
the the project
it's
my
very
wife
it's
and I
very
have
it's
been doing.
very hard to watch stuff without, like, I'll watch stuff with my wife and I'm just talking about like the edit and that shot. Oh, did you see that shot? She's like, yeah, I guess, whatever.
Yeah, my wife and I we're rewatching The Wire. If you haven't watched The Wire, it's
Cool.
worth the binge watch
It
while
is,
you're on
dude.
lockdown. But
Yeah, for sure.
it is a brilliantly constructed show. And so that I'm just thinking about like, okay, how did they like how did they structure this? How did they incorporate these characters? But like and just sort of understanding the storytelling choices. It's like good to be regularly doing that because it makes you a sort of challenge your own habits and stuff that you might have developed, but also just thinking about, okay, there's lots of different ways that people are telling these stories. So there's a lot of fundamental things, but then, all right, what are the different ways and different mediums that people are using to tell stories? Anyways, I just think it's like it's something that all the great people that I know in this business are constantly, working on their storytelling craft um, above all things. So like that's a good habit to get started on if you're just starting out.
Cool. Awesome, man. I think we could wrap it. I mean, you want to bring in any other stories, or is that cool?
Um,
We got more time
so
if you want to throw some stuff in.
one other piece of advice I would give. So most of how people got started in working in international journalism was, they would start on the lower end of the rung in like headquarters, sort of like how I did. Like I did an intern in one of the foreign bureaus, but then like worked my way up in the DC bureau, and then got transferred to like the Cairo regional bureau. I think I may have been like the last person at the AP to like have worked in that way. They used to have an international desk in New York, and then they would like send people from the international desk in New York. You were just hired locally in Bangkok, right?
I was living in Miami, but sent over to Bangkok.
Okay.
But I don't know. It was also
I
like graphics bank. It was a different kind of department of AP, I think.
Right. So I think like people getting sent over now, like AP, I think has even shifted its policies to have sending over less expats to places. But I think that era is sort of done, especially being in like major hubs of foreign
Sure.
correspondence like Cairo and Beirut and Istanbul. The people that really succeed are the people that just move there to a place that they're really passionate about. Maybe they're interested in the language or culture for a specific reason, and then they get really smart. They just like start to try to understand what's going on there, try to get connected, and then just start pitching. And it's a difficult few years. Like almost all the top correspondents for a lot of these places at the Washington Post or New York Times or the broadcasters are people who basically just picked up and moved there and started working on the language and getting to know, and then just started pitching and getting involved.
Sure.
There's the old adage of like pick a country and wait for the revolution to happen. And I think that's probably the only real
That's
viable
cool.
way if you're going to be like a foreign correspondent, pick the place you really like and go there. Especially now because there's travel within countries is probably going to be happening a lot faster than like country to country travel. So I used to say like go someplace where you had a lot of great access to the region. Um, so that's why a lot of people would end up in like Istanbul or Cairo. But now it's really you might be trapped in the one country. So choose a good country that fits your interests, and yeah, go set up there. If that's really what you want to do, but it's going to be expected to be really hard for a couple of years before you really get acquainted and really find a way to make it happen there.
Awesome. Cool. Um, yeah. What do you think? Any other little personal stories? Any other country specific stories?
Um, I mean, there's lots of country-specific stories. I'm trying to, yeah. I think one of the most challenging places was like Niger, because you movement is hard. Like we were talking about the security stuff, it was making me think of that. Like I went there for Search for Common Ground to film this gang leader, um, which we thought he was like a former gang leader, but then we got there and we sort of realized that he was still a gang leader, but their gang had been reformed to be a little more socially conscious. Um, and the only reason that we were really safe in the town that we went to is because we were sort of like under the protection of this gang leader. Um, and yeah, and then in a place like that, like we had to drive for an entire day to get there, just because flying was all the way. We had to like take one flight and then drive the rest of the way. Live in very squalid conditions. But yeah, I mean, a lot of this work can be very uncomfortable, but I think about that guy all the time in the work phase in the village. It's just like, um, he's just a great story. Like
It's
he,
like so.
the
What
work
what
he,
was what was that story, and what was the conditions? Meaning that where even you're sleeping, there's not like a hotel around, and you're sleeping in kind of
there was like a sort of hotel with a
yeah
lot of cockroaches. Like I don't want to be like, but
yeah for
it's
sure Hey, look, it's not going to be a comfort. It's not going to be Barcelona.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I mean, it's. But so when you say you think about this guy all the time, why? What's that character that was so
I mean,
instrumental?
this is a guy that came up with a really very violent past, and then in like working with a couple of organizations, and then taking all the people in his gangs, like really sort of committed to finding ways for them to be like taxi drivers, like moto drivers, taking people around on their motorcycles, and just finding a way to work without violence, and what a shift that has in the community, and how much respect he had, not just from the members of the gang, but also like also religious leaders, um, sort of like the leadership of the town. Like it just it was we sort of got in the middle of this. Like we met the top guys in the leadership there, and just seeing like how that whole community worked, and imagining what it might have worked like before, and how it's just a few individuals that could really change the trajectory of their society. Just like seeing how that takes place, it just, you know, when I think about like how something can be really hard, it's like it's probably doesn't get much harder than trying to, you know, reduce conflict in some of the more difficult parts of Niger.
So what did when you were saying like you imagine what it would be like before? Tell me what you think it was like before, or what you know based on what they told you it was like before, and then how it was reformed there based on.
I mean, I only know the stories that I was told, but and I don't want to get too graphic on all this, but like there's, I mean, a lot of people were just killed indiscriminately for money. There were rape houses where women would be brought in and maybe disappear for a while, where they were used pretty much just for sexual gratification. A lot of robbery, and then criminal enterprise. So, you know, and kind of imagine like a Wild West of the worst sort of crime activity, and that's sort of the picture that was painted by some of the different people we talked to. But and there's probably still aspects of that, but it seemed from the people we spoke to like a corner had been turned and was definitely on a path towards trying to resolve these issues.
And this one character was a bit more instrumental, at least in this community.
Yeah, I mean, he was like the leader of the gang, so like he had.
So was he like first doing these kind of killings and these robberies, and then totally
Oh
reformed, or
yeah,
what?
yeah, man, he's got scars up and down. Also, he's still got his machetes like back in his home. So I'll send you the video that we did of him.
Yeah, please,
Um,
yeah, and also if you guys got like a photo together, like with a thumbs up or whatever, send me that too.
I wonder if I do. I might have a photo of when I rigged a bunch of GoPro stuff all over him.
Jeez.
He was a good sport. I was like, "Do you mind if I put a bunch of camera equipment on you so you can embarrass yourself or among all the people that respect you in town?" And he was actually really good about it. So, yeah,
Cool.
I'll see what I have there. Yeah.
Yeah, please do, please do. Cool. All right, man. Cool.
But yeah.
And then what about one piece of advice for yourself when you were first starting, like your early 20s? If you're 22, what would you tell yourself?
If I was 22, I was still in film. So I don't know. Now I'd be like, careful about journalism. The industry's not going to go as well as you think it's going to go.
Oh my God.
But I have no regrets. I mean, honestly, it's a very gratifying field to be in. So I wouldn't change it any other way. But I was very optimistic about what film and video would do for journalism, which I guess in a sense it has. So it's been good to us. So yeah, I really can't complain. Maybe I would just bite my tongue and not tell my 22-year-old self. There's things better left discovered on your own.
Very cool. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Matt Ford, thank you.